Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the pubcast where leading scientists and industry professionals meet over a few drinks to discuss the latest ideas and trends in animal nutrition. We've got a good one teed up for you today. We're at the Tri State Nutrition Conference here in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and we're going to be discussing a presentation that's going to take place here later this morning called The Impacts of Heat Stress on the Dry Cow and Her Fetus. And that's going to be presented by Dr. Jimena Laporta from University of Wisconsin. Jimena, welcome. This is kind of I think it's your third time to the pub.
Yes.
Welcome back. Before we get started, I'd like you just kind of, for those out there that may not know you, just kind of give us a background about yourself, your pedigree, that kind of thing.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Like you said, I'm an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin. I'm originally from Uruguay in South America. Came to the U.S. in 2010 and never left. I did my PhD at the University of Wisconsin as well, and then started my career at the University of Florida, and then came back to the Dairyland in
Yeah,
2020,
back
and
to Wisconsin.
yeah, I'm still there.
Good for you.
Yeah.
The winters were too brutal in Florida. You
Yeah,
had to get
too
back to
humid,
Wisconsin.
too humid.
Yeah.
I needed some of the cold weather.
Good. Dr. Zimmerman is in the co-pilot seat. Good morning, Clay. Good to see you again.
Yep. Good morning.
Yeah, any words of wisdom for us this morning?
No, but looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, so am I. So we've got a color commentator today, Dr. Brian Gerloff. Welcome. We recruited him last night at the baseball game, and glad to have you join us today.
Well,
So
thank you.
welcome. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Brian?
I live in a town called Woodstock, Illinois. If you've ever seen the movie Groundhog Day, you've seen my town. And I grew up on a small dairy farm, went to Michigan State, to veterinary school, worked several years in Ohio, and decided as a practicing dairy veterinarian, didn't know enough nutrition. So I went back and got my PhD in nutrition, and then decided as a college person, I needed to get back to practice and moved to my home area and started a dairy practice in northern Illinois where I worked 25 years. And then about a dozen years ago, I went to work for Renaissance Nutrition as a full time nutrition consultant. So that's been my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, good. Well, listen, we're glad to have you here this morning. It was interesting to find out that you and I just kind of missed each other paths there in Ohio. I think you were just ahead of me, but
Yes.
looking forward to the conversation today. And we've got Laura Nihus is going to be the other co-host. You need the two co-hosts today. So, Laura, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Like you said, I'm Laura Nihus, and I am the technical services specialist for Balchem. So I'm recently started with Balchem a couple months ago, and I'm covering the East Coast and really enjoying it.
Good, good. Glad to have you, by the way. You're doing a great job, and so appreciated having you on a few podcasts here. Dr. Laporta, why don't you start off just kind of giving us some background about the presentation you're going to give today? We'll use that as the basis of our discussion.
Yes, so today's presentation is going to focus mostly on the impact of late gestation, so that dry cow on herself and her progeny. So the F1s and F2s, so the daughters and the granddaughters of those cows. So in this particular presentation, I will focus a little bit more on what happens to the cow herself in her mammary gland as she undergoes the dry period, involution, redevelopment of that gland, which sometimes we forget that that's a very important period for the cow, right? So what happens under heat stress? I'm going to show a little bit of that. And then kind of moving on to the effects of fetal programming on both as I said, the daughter and the granddaughter that are gestating in utero, and the impact on that fetal ovary that it's going to have effects on the second generation of granddaughters. So that generation we often don't think about when we think about lactating dry cows. So I want to focus a little bit on that because we see effects down the road 4 or 5 years later in those. They produce less milk, and we're now starting to see also impacts in their glands. So we were able to get some phenotypic data on them, and we see that their glands are smaller, they are less proliferative. So seeing that trend of impacts in the gland in the cow the daughter and the granddaughter. So that's exciting for me, not so much for them.
Yeah, no, that is exciting. So the one thing kind of struck me as you're laying that out is that you're talking about the daughter, granddaughter. What about even future generations? Any hypothesis there is how far out can epigenetics impact the lineage?
New research is changing everything we thought we knew about choline's impact on the cow and her calf, and top scientists have a lot to say about it. They are presenting new research that supports choline as a required nutrient to optimize milk production, choline as a required nutrient to support a healthy transition, choline as a required nutrient to improve calf health and growth, and choline as a required nutrient to increase colostrum quantity. This new research is solidifying choline's role as a required nutrient for essentially every cow, regardless of health status, milk production level, or body condition score. Learn more about the science that is changing the game and the choline source that is making it happen. Reassure precision-release choline from Balchem. Visit balchem.com/scientistsay to learn more.
Well, you're getting ahead of the game
Sorry.
because we were able last year to collect some data from the F3s, so the daughters of the F2s. So in 2020, when I moved from Florida to Wisconsin, I brought 40 heifers with me. Those were the F1, the first generation. And we generated the F2 and then the F3, and now we have some data on the F3. I'm not going to say anything about them. I'm going to build some suspense.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing some effects. The data we have so far, I'm going to give you a hint. It's in their skin. Their sweat glands are different, and we have seen that as well in the F1s and F2s. So we collected some mammary data, so we're going to go that path. But, we started this project with Jeff in Florida in 2019.
Yeah.
So
So what led
it's
you
been a while.
to look at the skin?
Well, the skin is something that was new to me, was something that, excuse me, one of my grad students got interest in
Yeah.
while we were in Florida. It's one of the adaptations that the in utero heifer will have, right? She, excuse me, she's exposed to high temperatures in utero. So one of the things she will do is, all right, I need to adapt, right? I need to change. What am I going to do? So she not stop growing, but she reduces her growth rate. And one of the other things that she is her skin.
Okay.
And when I say skin, it's a lot more than that. I'm talking about sweat glands specifically, the thickness of the epidermis. So there's a lot of things. And something that we observed that was sort of surprising, or at least I didn't know much about, the sebaceous glands.
Yeah. Okay.
Those are very different, and those even after 1 year of age, we still see differences. So still don't know what they do and what are.
Do they sweat more or less? What's
Well,
the
it depends on
impact?
when you look at it. I'm trying to remember quickly the results that actually my student is writing her thesis now. So I've seen this recently. So basically, the heat stress. I'm talking about the F1. So the daughters that were exposed to that in utero environment, so they have less sweat glands
Okay.
if they are heat stressed, and those sweat glands are deeper into the skin, so they kind of get farther away from the surface, and the skin is thicker. So those are two things that we see in the daughters. Yeah, and they have more sebaceous glands, presumably for trying to hide. I don't know. So we're trying to figure that out. And then we also see, we did it at birth, at weaning, at puberty, and we see that in that F1 consistent effect, even 1 year after. So that effect in the sweat gland seems to be a little permanent. So what I don't know, and I wish I would have done, this is when you look back and say, oh, we should have done that. I wish we would have stressed those heifers and see how they respond. But one interesting thing is, even without stressing them, one of my students, what she did is she measured sweating rate every 4 hours for a few days. And what we see is that the heat stress in utero heat stress heifers sweat more, which is very interesting. But they overall they have higher rectal temperature. The core temperature is higher. If I remember correctly, 0.2 degrees Celsius for the entire preweaning phase. So they start their life with a higher body temperature. So my suspicion is that any other stressor will trigger them easy,
Yeah.
right? But we don't know that.
Does the higher temp does that persist or just during the pre-weaning?
We only did
period?
it during the pre-weaning phase, yes. Then we follow them, but we did more intense work in those first 2 months of life. Yeah, but we tried to do some other things that didn't work, so I'm not gonna talk about those.
The teaser.
I have a question. So you looked at these changes epigenetically in female offspring.
Yep.
Have you looked in male offspring
Question.
as the potential to have different genetics from males that were heat stressed?
Yeah, I personally have not, but I know that other groups are doing that, and the potential to transmit epigenetic changes through the semen. I personally have not, but heat stress definitely has an impact there. I think there's a lot of work in sheep showing that there are also transgenerational effects of heat stress or nutrition through the male line.
And those are beneficial effects.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember. It depends on I mean heat stress, I don't think so. I think nutrition, the ones with nutrition that I have seen are beneficial, yeah.
Okay.
But I don't think there's anything good about heat stress.
No,
actually.
yeah.
One more question. Is there a difference between the effects in primiparous versus multiparous animals?
Yes, that's a great question, and we had that same question. We did a project where we look at the primiparous heifers heat stress, although they don't have a dry period. So our focus was the dry period, but the primiparous heifers don't have, right? The nulliparous heifers, first calf heifers, but their mammary glands are growing exponentially during that late gestation. And that's something that we often forget. But because I'm a mammary physiologist, I look at those things, right? So we did a project where we heat stress or cooled heifers that were on pasture. We brought them inside. I'm not showing that today, but we see that the effects that we see in multiparous cows are there. They're smaller in magnitude, right? Those heifers are still growing and things like that. So we don't see those bigger difference in rectal temperature, but we do see differences in skin temperature, in rectal temperature, in sweating rates in those nulliparous heifers, and lower production in their first lactation. We didn't dive deep into the gland itself to explain those changes, but 99% that is through reduced proliferation and growth of that mammary gland in that late gestation.
Okay.
We also see differences in the offspring as well.
So am I right in the F1s, as lactation number increases, that difference in milk yield loss increases, right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's I think the third lactation is the one where you see the most difference. I don't know if that's, due to we're losing a lot of animals, right? But I think that third lactation is really when they need to express that potential, right? And when we want to see the biggest difference in our cows or higher production, but it's when the heat stress do the worst. And I think it's like 6 kilos per day less, so that's pretty significant. But we also have to remember that the survival rate of these heifers goes down, right? I'm going to show that today, but we start losing them very early, even before the first calving. So we're losing heifers early on. We're losing heifers in their first, second lactation. So by then, we have a lot less.
Are they harder to get pregnant, nulliparous?
Yeah, we always look at that, but even though for the research that we do, our numbers are pretty good, we still are not there yet. I think we have done that, we report that, but take it with a grain of salt. We still see some, they need more breedings and things like that. But I think that there are a couple of studies that Jeff did in Florida with data, more data from California and Florida, that they are able to see that when they look at summer versus winter type
With a larger commercial
larger,
herd.
yes, like
Yeah.
looking more at health and things like that, because you need numbers, right?
So, Jimena, quick question for you, just kind of compounding off of that. Do you notice or have you made a large attempt to make sure that those heifers that came from heat stress dams aren't heat stressed again? Or do you have any compounding effect of multiple times being heat stressed like it typically would with summer?
That's a great question. So, all of those projects were done in the summer in Florida summer, hot, humid, and they are born within a month, and that pre-weaning period is typically September, October, November. So they are kind of okay for Florida weather at least. And then as soon as they are born, the cows from heat stress or cool cows, they are all together. So they might have gone through, I get this question a lot, they might have gone through future heat stress events, but they all go together, right? As a group, as a cohort. So yes, they live in Florida, so there's no escape from that, right? So yes, I think they have gone through some events, but all together.
So, for the purpose of the trial, how did you define heat stress, right? So, you're in Florida. We know it's hot down there, but how does that relate to, let's say, Illinois, Wisconsin? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So typically we define heat stress based on the temperature humidity index, where in Florida it doesn't get temperature wise, it doesn't get that high. It's the humidity that it's a killer, right? And we typically look at THI greater than 68 or 72, typically for cows. But in our projects, what we measure regularly is the rectal temperature. We do that several times a day. We do respiration rate, so we confirm that they are under heat stress physiologically and also through the environment. That's a given. They are going to be. It's gonna be hot. But the heat stress group don't have fans and soakers, so they are in a barn without any cooling, and the other group has fans and soakers. So that brings down that temperature, rectal temperature, respiration rate. So that cow is more under thermoneutral conditions, although she's in the same environment, but we're helping her to thermoregulate. And so that fetus that it's inside her, it's going to be quote unquote cool or gestated under thermoneutral conditions to be more precise. But yeah, that's how we define. We look at the environment, we look at the physiology of the cow as well.
And then, how many days under heat stress does it take to get the kind of impact that you're talking about?
Yes, so typically a dry period is 6 to 8 weeks, depending on what you do in your farms. But in Florida, it was actually a little shorter, 49 days, 7 weeks. So that's what when we did the heifer study, we ensured that they were under heat stress for 60 days because we wanted to target those last 2 months of gestation. But in the multiparous cows, it's typically 40, 49, 50 days.
Do you have a feel for how many days it's going to take to cause the effect? 5, 10.
In
Any
the
thoughts?
fetus or in the
In the dry cows. If they're of their
yeah
dry period, let's say they're only under heat stress for 10 days, are you
right
going to get
right
the negative impact?
for the entire next lactation, I'm not sure. So we have to think when we do this, let's say 6 7 weeks heat heat stress dry period, that has effects, and I'm going to show a graph for 40 weeks in the next lactation. So a 7 week event has carryover effects 40 weeks in the next lactation. Now, we did one study kind of get into that question. What if we cool them only during the close-up for 3 weeks? Will that be enough? Or what if we cool them early on in the dry period? Will that be enough? And the answer to that is no. So we need to cool them in Florida through the whole time to see those benefits in the next lactation. We didn't follow the calves from those that we swap, but yes, I think 3 weeks is going to impact the physiology of the cow, but cooling, I'm saying in this case, but it's probably not enough.
What was the difference in mortality rate on the calves between the heat stressed and unstressed?
Trying to think about the survival graph, I think we see 12% in that first couple months in the pre-weaning phase.
And what was the cause of most of those losses?
The typical things, but so like I'm trying to remember one of the last study we did there. They were just very lethargic, so they didn't want to eat. Their dry matter is depressed, and they just don't do well. Yeah, they are smaller and they have a harder time to absorb immunoglobulins. So there's a sort of things that happen to them that leads to that phenotype, and yeah, so they are off to a terrible start.
Yeah.
Does gut closure start earlier in those calves?
That's a Jeff theory. Yes, we have done some projects and we're finishing up one right now. We euthanize some heifers and we look at the gut, different portions of the gut, to dive deeper into that. We have some indication that the gut closure is happening a little bit earlier, before they are born, and so when they hit the ground, we give them colostrum. They are like, you know, and so there's a lot of implications to that, right, in terms of their acquisition of immune function and things like that later on, and they get more sick more often and they end up leaving the herd. But in the gut, we see that they have more cells dying, and we know that heat stress in any tissue is triggering cell death. So they are 7 weeks in that harsh environment, and that's triggering their gut to. That's what we looked at: mammary gland, gut, skin, but pretty much every other tissue it's impacted.
So I don't think we think much about mammary gland involution. I'm curious. So what are
How
the
bad?
differences that you're seeing in these dams?
So during the dry period, you have the early stages that are we call involution. So that's when you want cell death to happen. So you want a spike in cell death through apoptosis or other ways of cell death. So you want that to happen early on, and then as the cow approaches parturition and with the hormones of pregnancy and all of that, the mammary gland is going to proliferate. It's going to renew those cells, and she's going to produce milk in the next lactation. What heat stress does in that dry cow is not allowing those cells to die, actually. So the peak that we want in cell death is diminished early on, and that therefore it does not allow the gland to proliferate as much. So the gland starts her next lactation with older cells. She couldn't renew them in full, and so she produced less milk. That's kind of what we agree on.
So to simplify it, I'm going to put it in simple terms here. You want to tear it down and build it back better.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes. And that's why the dry period is so important. And every time I see, let's eliminate the dry period, no, please don't. Because that's why we offer a dry period, so that the mammary gland that has been making milk for 10 months or more can rebuild. Yes, can get rid of the old cells, bring in new ones, and
Now, Jimena, have you ever looked at heat stress during lactation having any of those same effects? I mean, I know that cows are typically cooled, but if we're thinking maybe in the late pregnant pen, what if those cows aren't cooled? Have you looked at that at all?
I have not, but Shatao, good friend and collaborator too, he has done some of that work, and some work from Virginia Tech as well, have heat stress, done heat stress work looking at the mammary gland specifically. And yeah, you see the same effects, nothing good, obviously. So more cell death, less proliferation, and just that immune response is diminished as well. So we also need that for that cell renewal and things like that. And especially in late lactation, those cows are starting slowly but surely to decline, right? So those processes start early on. When we dry them off, we stimulate them to happen more quickly. but they are already going down, right? So, yes, again, nothing good about heat stress.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Dr. Gerloff, I'm kind of curious in your area where you work. Do you see a lot of heat stress with a lot of your herds,
Well,
and do you do some interventions to try to cool the cows?
we certainly do in northern Illinois. Not as bad as southern Illinois, but yeah, we certainly have heat stress for periods of time. On one thing that's perhaps fortunate is we often get a window of bad heat stress and then it cools off. So it isn't as continuous, I think, as Florida, for example. But yeah, no, I would say in my client base, we probably only about half of them really worry about mitigating heat stress in dry cows. In the lactating cows, pretty much almost everyone does, but dry cows not as much.
Hmm.
So, and the typical reaction would be fans and sprinklers.
So I had a question for you. You were talking before about the impact on skin, sweating, mammary gland. What about other organs, right? Do we know? Have we looked?
Yes, we're very curious, so we look at a bunch of things. So, one of the tissues that we have looked at also is the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland is important because it's where cortisol is secreted. And what we see is the heifers that are born to heat stress dry cows are born with larger adrenal glands, actually, because they're working hard, right? Even before they are born. So, what we see is enlarged adrenal glands with the microstructure of that tissue all altered. And so, presumably, there's going to be, the adrenal gland secretes a bunch of other things. So, and so the physiology is going to be impacted of those things as well. So we look at the microstructure and we see that the layers are all messed up, and so it's a holistic effect. It's not one tissue. It's all the tissues. Trying to think what else. Immune tissues are also immune organs
Makes sense.
are impacted as well. Um, yeah, so a lot of
Jimena,
things.
what spurred you to look at the adrenal gland? Why did you first think, oh, we should take a look at this and see if it's different?
Just thinking about that cortisol secretion and how that in utero hyperthermia might do to the adrenal gland. We did RNA sequencing. We have a bunch of pathways that are impacted and things like that that are very interesting to look at. But what I'm impressed is about the effect in the size of the organs and the morphology, the microstructure. I really like to do histology to see the microstructure of the tissue and what the cells are.
Mhm.
And that's what struck me the most. They are larger and their layers are all impacted in the thickness and the cells that they have. So not only the things that they can express and secrete, but also the morphology of the tissues. And obviously the mammary gland, it's one of the ones I look the most.
If the heat stress is producing epigenetic changes in the fetus, is that animal more tolerant of heat stress as an adult?
That's a good question. I don't think we have a lot of data to show that. I th- I think first generation is preparing for the worst in a way, because sensing the environment in utero is not good. So let's just methylate these genes here and there. Let's not grow. Let's stop here. Let's save energy. So I think that the modifications that we see in that first generation are preparing them for a harsh environment. Um, so we have looked at epigenetics in the mammary gland of those daughters in their first lactation. We see hundreds of genes that are differentially methylated, but a lot of those are involved in pathways that are, very common for many tissues, like secondary messengers, cyclic AMP, so like very conserved pathways that are very important for any physiological function. So the impact is very broad. We also look at the liver to kind of see, like, are those differences that we see in the mammary gland unique to the mammary gland, or are they spanning across, other tissues? And we saw 50 genes that were differentially methylated in the same genes.
Pattern.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. We're trying to dig farther into that and look more into. But I honestly don't think it's about one gene, two genes, three genes. It's really a holistic effect that heat stress is having. But I'm gonna still look at that.
And this might be hard to discern experimentally, but would any kind of stress produce similar effects epigenetically? Cold stress, societal stress, interaction, or would it produce some of the same and then others that are unique to the heat stress?
That's an excellent question. I think one thing we have to remember is that when I think about dry cows, the stressors are cumulative, right? So if you have overcrowded dry cow pen and they're heat stressed, that's not gonna go well, right? So I think there are shared responses of most stressors. I think the uniqueness about heat stress is it's chronic, at least in Florida, right? They can't escape, right? So if you overcrowd, there are some cows that are going to do fine, some that are not. So the effect, it's sort of more diluted in the herd in a way. We all know it's not good. But I think too that those differences might be due to the intake. Some dominant cows are not going to let other cows eat. So I don't think you're gonna see a consistent effect in your herd. You will see some cows doing better than others with that specific stressor. So I think heat stress is one that affects everything, right, in the animal.
Yep.
Dr. Laporta, you're painting a dire story here, a dire picture, right? For dairy farmers that maybe have had problems with heat stress during the dry period, now they've got generations of animals that are impaired. And is there any good news? Is there anything that you can do to kind of mitigate some of these problems?
Yeah, well, like
Because it'll take years to get out of it, right?
right. And I think that my take home message is that, hey, look, dry cow heat stress, you can think of, all right, it impacts the cow that it's under heat stress. It's kind of intuitive, but the generational effects are not. So try to show that it kind of brings some food for thought. It's like, okay, I'm not saying it's more or less important than lactating cows. Absolutely not. But I think it brings the discussion of, even, in the Midwest, in Wisconsin, 2 months of heat stress, but we have a lot of cows. So you can impact a lot of generations even then. And our cooling systems are not that, I'm not gonna say they're not great. I've been to farms that they do an excellent job, even with the dry cows, and it's amazing to see. But it's not in every farm. And I forgot your question, actually.
Is there anything we can do?
Yes. There's many things we can
Okay,
do.
good.
Is there any good news?
Any good news? Yeah, I'm a very positive person, I think. So I like to think, well, what can we do to mitigate this? And obviously, cooling is one of them, right? Just helping them thermoregulate. They help their physiology to be back to speed. And when you think about dry cows, that gestation, allow that gestation to be under thermoneutral conditions. Nutritional, like we talk about that briefly, not only from the feed stuff you're feeding. I'm not a nutritionist, just a disclosure here, but that, feed stuff that generates less heat or things like that, supplementation of fat, protein, different supplements. There's a lot out there to tease out what's the best one. It's hard, especially for producers when they have all these options. But yeast base, nutrients, vitamins, minerals, trace minerals, amino acids, everything. Anything that can help that cow mitigate the negative effects of heat stress metabolically, help them thermoregulate, help them overcome the protein deficiencies that they have through the reduction in feed intake, fat metabolism. So anything we can do to help them, I'm sure it will.
But I think it's fair to say there's no magic bullet. You have to cool these cows.
I don't think there's a magic bullet, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And especially with moving cows across the country, that makes it a little bit more challenging, right? In that experiment I was talking earlier, we moved the cows from Florida to Wisconsin. They went from 35, 40 degrees, no, 45 degrees in Florida winter to minus 20 in December in Wisconsin. Yeah. And we still see differences in growth. So that tells you that no matter what you do, those effects are going to stay with the animal. It's hard to wipe them off once that happens, but you can avoid them. You can try to prevent them, right? With
Yeah.
management, nutrition, cooling.
It-
But once they are in there, it's pretty hard. We tried a couple things. Our thought was, okay, if they are born to a heat stressed cows, let's cool them. It's gonna fix the problem. Of course, it didn't, but you have to try it, right? So
As in everything, right? There's a lot of research yet to be done on this. Yeah, things to,
keep us
to
busy
discover. Yeah,
and
keep you
employed.
busy. Can you talk about maybe just one or two of the key things that that you're looking forward to studying in the future? Some things that are going to have an impact on the industry.
Yes, we're focusing a lot more in the what I call perinatal programming. So not just the in utero effects, but also once that calf is born in the pre-weaning phase, we're trying to develop cooling mechanisms for calves, and we have done that in the last 4 or 5 years. Working now with the Dairyland Initiative in Wisconsin, they with Courtney Hallback, and trying to think outside the box. I think with everything that's going on in our industry, well, our heifers are very valuable, right? So we're investing a lot in making them. So I think there is a shift in let's take care of them right from the get go, and so. Doing that, and we just have a USDA grant with Chateau in Georgia, and we're doing projects in Georgia and Wisconsin with cooling calves in the pre-weaning period and different planes of nutrition. So trying to tease out what are the potential interactions with that, and trying to stimulate mammary growth by cooling them through nutrition. And one thing that I am starting to talk more about is the early life mammary growth, that it's important, right? When we think about the mammary gland, we typically think of, okay, let's influence, components through feeding when she's lactating already. I'm talking about early on the foundation of that tissue and how we can manipulate that in a way for the better, right? And through nutrition, through feeding them better, through cooling, through a lot of things. So that foundation will then lead to better cows.
have you or anyone else looked at these same effects in beef cattle?
Effects on the calf?
On
or
the calf, yeah.
There's a lot of research in beef cows, mostly from the muscle perspective, like the fibers and how that impacts. The difference with beef cows is that the calf stays with the cow for a longer period of time, and so the influence is more direct. So it's harder to tease that out, the fetal programming effects.
Versus the
Right.
effect directly on the
Yes.
mammary
Yes.
gland. Yep.
But yeah, there's research. I mean, we have done some work while I was in Florida with Dr. Di Lorenzo in Mariana, where we offer shade to beef cows with or without their calf. We did a couple projects, and it's very interesting. You see impacts of simply shade.
Because I think of my clients over the years, and probably the beef cattle are at least as heat stressed.
Oh
as
yeah,
the
yeah,
dairy
and
cattle.
mostly like a lot of those are exposed to solar radiation,
Yep.
which It's another killer.
Jimena, I'm curious, in Wisconsin, how do you impose heat stress there?
Well, we have a shorter season, right? But it's fairly intense, I would say. So, according to I was looking at some data a few years ago, um, with threshold of a THI of 68, cows in Wisconsin would experience at least 13, 14 hours a day. What we have going on is that they have that nighttime to cool off slightly, so to release the heat accumulated through the day. So that's good for them. So that's the impacts are probably less severe because of that. So we either have to do it in July and August. We have used electric heat blankets as well to stimulate heat in those cows. And yeah, we finished a project a couple of years ago, and we did a transition cow study, 60 cows with blankets.
So you were talking earlier about doing some heat stress work in calves. So is that what is that, shade or no shade?
With calves, in Wisconsin, what we're doing, you mostly see calf hutches there, which are designed for winter, not for summer. So there are some things that farmers do in the summer. They change the orientation, they raise the hutch, and there are easy things that we can implement to improve the ventilation inside the hutch. It gets very hot in that hutch. If you haven't tried, I invite you to go in. I've done it. I have pictures. It gets very hot in that hutch. So what we're trying to do is provide fans, active cooling to release that heat, the accumulated heat inside the hutch. We have done that, different prototypes to look at that using solar panels to power fans and redirect the air inside. And I guess the main effect that we see is an improvement in air quality. We see a lot less bacteria buildup in those hutches, which obviously is going to be beneficial. Less ammonia. So it's in its infancy because at the farm level those things are still hard to apply at a larger scale. In Georgia, we did a positive pressure tube for calves, kind of, again, thinking outside the box. This is a drain tile with a fan, and then we put holes. And so each calf had 5 holes, and we put a mister inside that tube. Yeah, we get creative.
Wow.
And yeah, now in Wisconsin this summer we're going to do a project in a commercial farm. They install positive pressure tubes, so we're going to test those. So I mean, farmers are very looking forward to solutions. And this particular farm, they have a hill right next to their barn, so ventilation is really bad. And they noticed that, and it's like our calves in this barn do awful. So just trying to in the summer, obviously. So trying to help that way.
And then a quick
Yep.
question for you. You said that you did 60 cow heat
Yes.
blanket.
How did I survive that?
How?
Well, my student almost quit, but she's defending in a month, so she
So was that
survived.
30 blankets that you were
Yes.
using? Oh my gosh.
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
So we kind of adapted the model that Lance Baumgart lab used. We did some modifications to make sure that the blankets could stay on for that long, because it was 11 weeks. We did 4 weeks pre-calving and 4 weeks, if I remember, post-calving.
Wow.
So yeah, it was hell. But yeah, especially for the students. And like when those cows, like they were in lactation, you have to unplug them, go to milking, and a lot of broken controllers and ripped blankets. Yeah, but it was fun.
That should be good data.
I hope.
Dr. Laporta, as we begin to wind down here, is there any key points that you're going to talk about in your presentation that we need to explore just a bit here?
Yeah, I think I can sort of summarize what my take-home message is.
Hold that thought. We'll do that at the
Okay,
end.
well, so in this presentation today, I'm going to focus what we were talking earlier today, that dry cow under heat stress, what happens to her in her next lactation from a mammary perspective. A little bit, I will show some photos to visually see what the tissue looks like. They have less alveoli, which is the milk secretory unit of the gland. So they are smaller, they are less. So the way I like to think about it is like you have a factory with less workers, so you're not going to get the work done, right? And so that's from the cow's perspective. And obviously, they produce less milk for entire lactation. And then from the daughter's perspective, trying to recap what my slides are. Okay, from the F1 perspective, I'm showing the impact on her mammary gland. So they have smaller udders. So when we dissect the udder, we open it up and we see what's inside. Because that's one of the things, like in early life, you see not much change going on externally, right? Like they are just growing at the same rate of the body. But when you look at the tissues that are inside, that's a different story. And so those are growing very differently. The parenchyma that is going to become that future secretory tissue is growing exponentially, actually 25-fold increase we have seen. And so there's a lot more that we can see to the naked eye, right? So trying to show some of that data. I don't go in depth here because of time, but that, and then a little bit on the F2, like their survival, it's also impacted, productive life, milk production, and we're going to take a peek on her mammary gland and seeing that proliferation is impacted. They also have less estrogen receptor in that gland. And we often not tend to think about estrogen at this early life stage, but it's important for that growth of the gland. And a lot more research that, Van Amberg, even Capuco, Akers labs have started a few years ago is manipulating that early life mammary gland through nutrition, in their case, but manipulating that mammary gland to make them more proficient at what they do later in life.
Interesting. That's going to be a great presentation. Um, what I'd like you guys to do right now is come up with a couple key takeaways that you'd like to share with the audience, and we'll kind of go around the table here. And Human, I'll leave you till last, but and I'm going to start off with Clay.
Tonight's last call question is brought to you by Niasure Precision Release Niacin. Niacin is a proven vasodilator for heat stress reduction and a powerful antilipolytic agent for lowering high blood NEFA in transition cows. Protected with Balchem's proprietary encapsulation technology, you can be sure it is being delivered where and when your cows need it. Learn more at balchem.com/Niasure.
He's the lead-off batter.
Yeah. So a couple things. Actually, I want to clarify a
Yes.
statement you made much earlier in our discussion when you said it doesn't really get that hot in Florida.
In Florida?
I think you actually said that. I
Ah.
think
Errata.
I think what you meant is it rarely gets over 100 degrees in Florida,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, exactly.
But it's in the
Yes.
90s
Yes, yes.
persistently in the
Yes.
summer with really
Yes.
high humidity.
Yeah.
So it's very oppressive.
But
Heat.
the problem is the humidity. If you have like 85 in Wisconsin, it's not terrible, but in Florida, it's hell.
Right. So the key takeaways really are you need to cool your dry cows. I mean, these impacts.
It's simple.
Yeah. I mean, it goes out 2 generations now, right? We know these effects are going out through the granddaughters. I'm very curious to see your F3 data
Oh, I'm too.
when you have that. So yeah, it's pretty cut and dried as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Clay. Dr. Gerloff, any thoughts, learnings, key ideas you'd like to share?
Well, I guess one thing that struck me, one is obviously cooling the dry cows is even more critical than historically we have viewed. And the other thing is so in probably the last 10 or 15 years, I've been amazed at how many studies are showing these epigenetic effects that what we do today has an impact so much farther into the future than we've even comprehend it. It's sort of like in the Bible, it affects the children of the second and third generation, and that it's both exciting and scary.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Back to
That's a
that
good way
dire
to put
picture.
it.
Laura, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think one really big takeaway that I've seen from this podcast, at least today, is that it's more far reaching than kind of maybe just affecting the mammary gland, as you were talking about the adrenal gland and looking at the liver, and that there was really whole cow effects on these calves from heat stress dams, and that you really see it impacting the hormones and that sort of thing. And so I think that it's clear that we don't know the whole story yet. I mean, we see it in the reduction in milk yield, but now trying to figure out exactly where that's coming from is going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, good comments. Dr. Laporta, final words.
Yeah, I think I enjoy the conversation. I always get new ideas and perspectives when I do these things. So thank you. I guess from my point of view, the take home or the what I get from our conversation is that heat stress is more than just lactating cows. That's the first thing that come to mind, right? Our lactating cows and 100% on spot, right? But it's about kind of expanding our thinking a little bit in those dry cows and the generational effects that they have in at least 2 generations and potentially 3. That third generation is going to be the unexposed one, because in utero you will have the germline that will give rise to the second generation. So they are technically indirectly exposed as well, but the third generation has not experienced any of that. So it's very interesting to see that there's a lot of work in other species showing that even the F3 can be impacted. I think the uniqueness of this work is that it's in cows, right? Obviously with its limitations, but I think it's bringing a whole different conversation about epigenetics and how is it possible that we see these things down 4, 5, 6 years down the road. And I think it's scary, but it's also exciting to understand what can we do about it. But in order to fix it, we need to understand it first. So I think that's sort of what I'm trying to preach about. And from the dry cow perspective, thinking about the dry period as more than just a vacation. And there's a reason why someone 100 years ago said, let's dry cows, right? And they were right. I'm an advocate for that. And I think it's important to provide them with a better environment while they go through that transition. I think it's important to think about that. And I think the third sort of thing that I want to bring up is the early life calf, that transition from the intrauterine life to the outside life. I think that transition is important too, and we can manipulate, and that word sounds a little scary, manipulate, but we can influence positively, yes, her mammary gland through nutrition, through the environment, through both. But I think that early life they are still plastic in a way. They are adaptable, and so we can influence them. Obviously, heat stress, again, third time, nothing good about it, but we can influence for positively by cooling, nutrition, and give them a better chance to be better cows.
Excellent. Jimena, excellent conversation.
Thank
It's
you.
been very interesting. You're always a great guest. So thank you for
Thank you.
joining us. Yeah,
And thank you for the coffee.
you're very welcome. Clay, Laura, thank you for joining us. Dr. Gerloff, thank you for your insights, your expertise. Been a great guest today. Thanks for joining us here.
It was my great experience, and I think I got more out of it than listening to it talk.
I hope you come to mine, though.
Yeah.
I will.
Absolutely. And to our loyal listeners out there, thank you for coming along with us on another episode. Hope you learned something. Hope you had some fun. And I hope to see you next time here at the Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour and you're always among friends. Hi, I'm Scott Sorrell. I'm here to invite you to a very special event at the upcoming ADSA conference in Louisville. It's going to be a bourbon tasting. We're calling it Bourbon and Brainiacs. Now, why do you call it Bourbon and Brainiacs? Because we're going to have all your favorite professors there doing a bourbon tasting. We're going to have 6 to 8 bourbons there. We're going to be recording a podcast and doing the tasting while we're there. We've even got a bourbon barista, which I'm not sure exactly what that is, but we're going to have one of them there. Now, listen, this is only for 120 of our favorite friends. That's all this place holds. We're going to have it at the Fraser Museum. It's a bourbon museum there in Louisville, and so only 120 people can fit in there, and so we want you to be one of them. And so to become one of the 120, all you have to do is go to balchem.com/bourbon and register. Once those 120 slots are gone, they're going to be gone, but I hope to see you there.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests. So please reach out via email to anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars continues with ruminant-focused topics on the first Tuesday of every month, monogastric-focused topics on the second Tuesday of each month, and quarterly topics for the companion animal segment. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the latest schedule and to register for upcoming webinars.